Our guest today is Dr. Leanne Desouza. She is a research program manager at St. Michael's Hospital in downtown Toronto. She is an adjunct professor at University of Toronto, a mother of soon-to-be 4 children, and a children's book author. Dr. Desouza, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me, Reema, and please call me Leanne.
Oh, Leanne, absolutely. Now, I understand you're a doctor in the sense that you have a PhD, correct?
That's correct.
Oh, and what is your area or field of research?
So I did my PhD in the Institute of Medical Science at the University of Toronto, and I've always had a passion for preventative medicine and basically ways to prevent the onset of disease or slow the progression of disease. So the model that I studied in my PhD was gestational diabetes. And gestational diabetes is known to affect predominantly South Asian women and East Asian women.
Yes.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
High-risk population in the room. And I was looking for a way to detect gestational diabetes earlier in pregnancy, because typically we detect it later in pregnancy, but by looking at risk factors that can be modified or acted on early in pregnancy, we can delay or stop diabetes from happening. That was the plan.
Okay.
And we did detect different methods that we could use that would signal that a woman is at high risk early on in pregnancy.
Oh, okay.
And gestational diabetes is a really big issue because it poses a risk of adverse pregnancy outcomes for mom and baby. Oh. And in the long term, the years after pregnancy, it poses a risk of developing diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and obesity in mom as well as her children.
Oh, and the child as well, if
Exactly.
the mom had gestational diabetes. I knew the mother had it, I didn't know about the children.
Yes, exactly.
Oh,
and that's why the impact of gestational diabetes is so longitudinal and vast, and therefore it has huge public health concerns for Canadians, being a very diverse population, but really it's a global issue, as you probably know.
So in the sense of being in academic research, doing your PhD in the medical field, and obviously just working in downtown Toronto, what are the challenges that you have faced in getting to where you are? Yeah.
Right. I'd say, well, how much time do we have?
Yes.
Really, I could be summative in saying that they fall under 2 domains, and that would be professional and personal.
Okay.
And professionally, I think that some of the constraints that exist probably exist across the board for different lines of career, not just for academics.
Okay.
But I'll speak specifically to academia and
Yes,
being a scientist, is that in the years, those preparatory years, as you prepare to get that full-time dream job as a main faculty member, you have to really show years of excellence in 2 domains, and that would be teaching as well as research. So that means that you have to be an active academic where you're teaching students and you're getting strong reviews from your students as well as from other faculty members. You're building a really strong teaching portfolio. Okay. Or as we call it, a teaching dossier. Okay. Alongside that, there's also the objective or prerequisite to achieve research excellence, which means that you have to publish frequently and also in high-tier journals and have your recommendations come from your peers and colleagues who can speak to your excellence as a researcher and an expert in your area of study. So in order to do these things, you really have to have the opportunity to practice your craft and to get out there and have those teaching hours and have those opportunities to run your own research. And it's very difficult to monetize this. Typically, you would have to do it in the way that I'm doing it, which is part-time. Okay. So that is where I bring in my full-time position at St. Michael's Hospital, which has been wonderful. Strategic in the sense that I get to practice my craft with people I admire and look up to in the Women's Health Research Group. Okay. So we study everything under the sun related to women's health research and and obstetrics, gynecology, labor and delivery. And that's a way for me to be able to fund my life. And this is where the challenge comes in, is when a woman in academia and in science wants to grow a family, the necessity of having a hiatus through maternity leaves fact be that it poses a delay or stalls or slows the progression in your workflow. And when you have to show these sort of line items accumulating of success in teaching and research, there is that impediment that you're working against. Having said that, we don't really live, we like to think we live in a world that's very supportive of women having multiple mat leaves or growing their family and being able to juggle it all. The reality is that we don't. And so as individuals, we have to find a way to to achieve not only balance, but also to mobilize our efforts to be able to be prolific in the different ways that we want to succeed in life, in our careers, but also to be able to have those financial goals, which of course my husband and I have for ourselves and for our children. And that means strategically placing yourself in positions that not only allow you to practice your craft, but also allow you to make a living.
So in academia, is there an expectation by a certain age that you get to a certain number of publications or a certain number of teaching hours? Or?
I wouldn't say it's by a certain age, but it's interesting that you brought up age, because typically in the days gone by, they've really, there's been a paradigm shift, and I think that it's eventually going to be widespread. But in the past, it really was this belief that you would go from your undergrad to some graduate studies, go see the world, do some postdoctoral work, and then maybe come back to your alma mater or to some other country in a tier 1 university working as a professor.
Right.
But that was in a time when there were many positions available, but also in a time where people were starting younger. And I think people are pursuing graduate work later on in life. Oh. And so they're often in their 30s, they want to start a family, and to have this expectation that they take some kind of break or go away somewhere else to pursue postdoctoral studies. And postdoctoral studies is known to be, because it's training, it still includes sort of a lower income bracket, sometimes even at the poverty line.
Oh, wow.
And so it's difficult, as you can imagine, to have those financial goals and to grow your family. So I think that people are, to answer your question, having children and entering into doctoral studies and postdoctoral studies later on in life. And so those markers for determining age at which you achieve something are just unrealistic. And I don't think they're very widely subscribed to.
And the goal being to get to tenure in a university.
Typically.
So you can do research and teaching if that's what you want to do as well.
Typically,
yes. Okay. So then going to your teaching. So you're an adjunct professor at University of Toronto. I believe you started that fairly recently.
Yes, so I've had over 15 years of teaching experience at the University of Toronto in various capacities and at all 3 campuses. But right now I'm teaching at the University of Toronto in the biology department at the Mississauga campus. And yes, my adjunct professor work has just been in the last 3 or 4 years. And currently I'm teaching a really neat course called Social and Developmental Determinants of Health and Disease. And so I really get a chance to expose senior level undergraduate students to the public health domain, the research and the knowledge translation that they can be a part of if they want to in the years following undergrad.
So you had mentioned there's professional and personal challenges. So it's sort of segueing into that. Obviously, the St. Michael's job is basically a full-time job.
Yes.
You know, Monday through Friday, probably not 9 to 5, probably a little bit earlier, a little bit later, depending on the workload. And then obviously you're teaching classes at least once a week?
Twice a week.
Twice a week. So, and that's probably evenings, weekday evenings. Yeah. On top of which you have 3 children and are expecting a 4th. So how do you handle all this?
Well, actually, I have another job, and that's a part-time position working with one of my mentors, and it's a really gratifying experience because she's a public health social work researcher, and so we're in the Department of Social Work together, and what we do is we look at census data and we characterize trends in the population, especially vulnerable populations, for particular conditions. So what's neat about that is she's a mentor of mine for many reasons, but she's also a mother of 4, and she's found a way to make it work and be excelling at everything she does. And so she's really been a great guide for me personally and professionally. And so I think that it's really about, nobody chooses to be in the balancing act where they're juggling all these balls. I think it's really a necessity in the field that I'm in order to be able to get all these opportunities. You sort of have to have your hands in many pots, so to speak. But I think it's important as women to also have an exit strategy and to make sure that in the time that you're working this hard, full steam, you have some sense of what is it that I want to achieve in the time that I'm here? What is the timeline for these goals? And when is enough so that I know when to transition out of it and maybe just focus on 1 or 2 things. So I do think that we can have it all, but it's more about, putting with wild abandon all the things you want to do in life on a list and then prioritizing them and finding the time that's right to do things, recognizing that we all have a tendency to say, maybe now's not the right time, maybe I don't have the money, or the kids should graduate, then I can focus on myself. But really we're leaders and inspire our children by our actions. So there is a place and a space for women to achieve their different goals. And I think that part of the solution is to look inward, but also to find the support systems around you that you can rely on and be inspired by.
So can you talk about some of the maybe support systems you do have, others you wished you had, and what about when something falls through?
Sure. So with the support systems, I think first and foremost is family. I have a very supportive husband. I have amazing parents, a sister and her husband, who are very much integral components to our life, and they're very supportive, and I can lean on them not only for advice but for actual practical help with the children. The other components, I think, are to have people in your life who really inspire you, like this mentor that I'm talking about. And it's important, I think, for women to have male and female mentors, so that you can look to people who have supported other women and have themselves been successful, and recognize the challenges that we have to balance the world of being a mother and also being able to be successful in your career. And to be a woman of visible minority, that adds another layer of complexity.
Yes.
So it's very important, I think, to have different types of mentors in different domains and various aspects of your life. And I'm part of a mother's group, and it's really neat because they have nothing to do with anything that I do in life, but career-wise, but they really inspire me with the way they raise their children, the choices they make, and the plans for their future and how they work towards those goals. And I think it's important to be inspired by those women, hear their challenges, be a support to them, and, you know, as you reach up for your own goals, help others along the way. And that in itself can be very gratifying and motivating.
Okay, so you have a lot of support networks in place, like backups and backups and backups.
Yes, and I'm always looking for more.
Yes, okay, good. All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. We are actually going to go to a short break now, and then we will be back. Thank you.
Injuries not only impact you, but also people around you. Life is better than this. Let's get your life back. The injury lawyers at Alum Law will use their years of experience to handle your claim so that you can focus on your recovery. And remember, you don't pay until we win. Alum Law.
Welcome back to our segment with Dr. Leanne Desouza. Earlier, she talked about how she's the research program manager at St. Michael's Hospital. She's also an adjunct professor at the University of Toronto and a mom of soon-to-be 4. But this inspiring woman didn't just stop there. She is also a children's book author. So, Leanne, can you tell us, on top of everything else you're doing, you got time to write a children's book called Nutritious and Delicious. Yes, so tell us about this book and what led to you writing it.
Well, you know what, Reema, it sounds like I really took on a huge feat, but actually it was kind of a soul-searching experience for me to write that book. So when I finished the PhD, I felt just, you know, brimming with enthusiasm, excitement, and where I'm going to contribute my next steps in the world. And I felt that, you know, with all the knowledge that we have as scientists, we're very careful about what we put into the world in terms of knowledge translation. And you really want to make sure that everything that you've researched, you've checked and double-checked, and others have checked and double-checked it before you share it with others, and it makes sense. Having said that, there are some fundamentals that we learn in the process of science where we can share information with the public, and we often do that. I mean, the first line of sharing really comes to sharing with your peers, and that's academic conferences, for example. But I really felt with the book that I wanted to be able to share this with the end user, the people who can actually use the information to make a difference in their lives. And when we think about patients who have type 2 diabetes, they're typically diagnosed later on in life. And some of the changes that we ask them to do, the first level, if you will, of changes, are lifestyle. The reason it's so difficult to do, as many of us know, because we all know somebody facing living with diabetes, is that there's years of habituation and ways that we've lived our lives that it's difficult to work against that. It's difficult to have these massive paradigm shifts. And when I thought about like brainstorming with my husband, like who can I tell this to? Who can I share this with? I think I need to tell the children. And you know, we thought our own children, but then on a larger scale, I thought, you know, who really has the benefit of time, not just for habituation's sake, but also metabolically. The more time you have to make that impact, the better it is to make those eventual changes in your life so as to never hopefully see type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and the metabolic conditions that go with that. And so that was the real impetus for the book. And it's called Nutritious and Delicious, A Fruitful Conversation for Kids, because it's a nonfiction book and it's meant to be a dialogue with the reader, so if a parent, teacher, whomever, with the children, to talk about the fundamentals that we share with people much later in life, but really we should be sharing with children basics like what to eat, how to eat the rainbow, and to eat certain portion sizes. Really easy concepts that children can digest readily and that they can apply to their day-to-day lives.
So this isn't, I've read the book, obviously. I'm not the target audience, but I've read it. Yes. But it's not science-y. Like, it's very approachable. Like, what age range would you say this book is meant for?
You know, I really wrote it for 3 to 6, but I've done some talks in the schools, and I've noticed that so many people are not having the opportunities to talk to their children, or maybe they don't know in what manner to approach the topic with their children, and it's not something that's really ingrained and entrenched in our school system, so that I'm finding older children are finding this to be informative. I wasn't expecting that. And while that's sad on some level, I'm happy that they're finding it to be useful and fruitful, if you will. And so I'd say that the age target is probably ranging now more so from 3 to 6, but then 6 to 10 years old, and it's definitely not so academic or sciencey, and it's deliberately so, but it's rooted in science, and it's also rooted in education, because at the end of the day, I'm also an educator, and so I think that it's designed in such a way that it teaches parents also in the back. There's some guidelines for parents and educators on how to deliver this material to students, especially if you wanted to have it in that dialogue where you engage them in part of the discussion.
Okay, so I can see how you tied in sort of your PhD, research with diabetes, into nutritious, and your teaching, all into this book here. So then the question is, because obviously you're not stopping here, so what are your plans for the future then?
Well, you know, there was such a good reception for this book and such a curiosity among my students, friends, and friends of children who are older that I'm writing a follow-up to it that'll be targeted more to an older audience, I would say young adults. Now I'm very uncertain about exactly what the age range is, recognizing that we're not having enough of these discussions with our youth and with our children. So I think that it'll be a broader audience. And I'm also, I think you'll find this interesting, working on a book that has to do with the glass ceiling and the issues that we face as women in different fields, whether it's in the field of work or working out of the home, and the decision making that we have to make to get to where we are, but also the prejudices and the constraints that we face, because we're not only visible minorities, but we're also women, and there's all kinds of issues under the gender equity gap that we can address in that book. And I'll take it chapter by chapter and case by case, and I think that hopefully it'll address at least a niche market of women who are looking for some inspiration and support.
Oh, that's excellent. I had no idea you were doing a book on that as well, but I do think it is needed. Obviously, you've managed to be very successful. Which is great, but part of that is also you probably faced more challenges along the way than somebody else who perhaps wasn't a woman or wasn't racialized. So just, I think even acknowledging that that exists, talking about ways to address it. We can't solve everything, but we can certainly make a difference, make a crack in the glass ceiling, as they say. So I think that that's wonderful that you're doing that. May I ask if you have any advice that you would offer for women that are interested in entering the academic field? Sure.
So I like that you mentioned the glass ceiling, and I think that, you know, proverbial glass ceiling that we are all under and suppressed by is important, and I think it's important for the whistleblowers of the world to exist and the people who are breaking down barriers to exist, and certainly they are strong people that we can all rely on, and they are men and women.
Yes.
Having said that, I think that it's important for all women, and I think especially when you go down the academic path, to build your own home and worry about your own home, sort of brick by brick, build your foundation, find ways to expose yourself to opportunities, while you also keep very cognizant of the fact that it's a slippery slope you can get taken advantage of in all kinds of free work, but recognize that you also have to have a way to monetize your degree, to monetize this career that you're after. And brick by brick build that home for yourself by laying a foundation of opportunities that are meaningful, opportunities where you're able to not only make money but practice your craft and be exposed to people who are doing better than you in various domains, so that you can be influenced by them, learn from them, be inspired by the work that they're doing. And that's, I can't stress more, because I really think that the people you know and surround yourself with are critical to you developing the skills of self-discipline and focus and drive that it really takes to be able to stay on course, and find the right opportunities that really build up what you're trying to achieve and not distract you from what you're trying to achieve, and to have people around you who support that opportunity for you to be a woman and to raise a family and to have more children if that's your plan.
Right.
But people who will really support the endeavor of being a woman, but also being a woman who wants to have a career.
And that's really interesting. You're talking about building your own home and monetizing it, because in a sense that we're almost told not to desire financial benefit, as if it's somehow unfeminine.
Right.
And yet it's a way that at least it sounds like you can achieve what you want to achieve. So that young women should consider asking to be paid what they're worth, basically.
Absolutely.
So have there been situations where you have been sort of expected to provide free work or discounted
Oh yes,
work? Oh,
and I
really?
think that it's like, it's a problem in academia in general. There's always this expectation to volunteer and to let's try it out and see how it goes, and maybe if you volunteer I'll give you a letter of reference, and these are important aspects to your education, but there comes a point where you have to say to yourself, no, I've achieved enough education and I've acquired enough skills that I need to be paid for this. So it's not like you're an undergrad and you're trying to expose yourself to different things. You're not sure what exactly you want to do, and so you might volunteer for different research labs or research teams for free. But even like I mentioned earlier, the postdoctoral fellowship is typically a very low income.
Yes.
And so lots of things in science, like various venues you can approach for employment, are usually underpaid, especially in those early years. And a lot of it has to do with whatever government is in power and how funding is going. So it's something to contemplate and consider when you go down the path of being a scientist, is where is the funding coming from, and where will that support be in the long term? And is there a way to still practice this passion and learn this skill that I want to have, or become a scientist and find ways to still be able to be financially independent? And I think as women, we always have to be positioned to be financially independent, regardless of what our state is with partners. And so it's just really important, I think, to keep that in the back of your mind as you choose your career. As much as we'd like to say, and many scientists, if not most, go into it thinking, I'm going to change the world and do something big, the money will come later. Right. And I think that's a wonderful way to think of things, but the reality is we live in the world that we do, and it costs money to live.
We have bills to pay every month.
Exactly.
Yes. So that's an interesting point you brought up, because Canada is a country of immigrants. We're about 2/3 immigrants in Toronto as it is. And so many people that are coming with foreign qualifications have to sort of prove themselves. And maybe there's an expectation that I have to volunteer or do free research. So what you're suggesting is, yes, that may be true, but be hesitant and not get taken advantage of. Would that be accurate?
And I think be very discerning, because you definitely are going to have to, especially as like international graduates, there will be a component of needing to prove yourself and needing to get Canadian references and build that resume with some Canadian experience. Yes. That's inevitable. But to be discerning and selective about who you work with and the kind of environment that you're working in. I mean, I've heard it all. Leanne, you're so nice, or you're too nice. We knew that you would say yes. Oh, Leanne, with all these maternity leaves, like, why bother getting a PhD? Why do you think you deserve a promotion if you've been away, as if I was on some vacation?
Right.
And so you're always going to have these setbacks, and maybe people you really look up to are going to disappoint you. But it's about being strategic in what you select, and then once you're there, having a plan and a timeline. In this amount of time, I need to accomplish X number of goals or this particular goal, and then that exit strategy of then it's going to be time to move on to something else. And so being selective in general is important, but even more so when you're international and you're coming in to Canada and you need that Canadian experience.
Okay, that is great advice. You know, I could keep asking you questions for 3 hours, but unfortunately this is the time we have. So thank you very much for joining us
Thank you so much for having me, Reema. It's my pleasure.
And that is our segment with Dr. Leanne Desouza. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it, and we will have future segments as well with other inspiring women in Canada. Thank you.